O nosso próximo tema é a produção de soja responsável no Canadá. Para nos falar a respeito, vamos dar as boas-vindas ao Sr. Nick Betts, que é coordenador de desenvolvimento sustentável da Grain Farmers of Ontario, encarregado de liderar a participação da GFO no desenvolvimento de parcerias e iniciativas vinculadas à sustentabilidade, o ambiente e a inocuidade dos alimentos. Nick Betts.
Thank you. And I'd like to thank RTRS for the invitation to attend and to speak today. I look forward to sharing some of Ontario and Canada with you here now. We did get a chance, me and my colleagues did get a chance to go to the falls here in town yesterday, and they are quite brilliant. Canada, my home, about 2 hours from where I live, is home to the largest volume waterfall in the world. But it doesn't, where we have volume, you have beauty. So I was disappointed last night though when I got back to the hotel room and I couldn't find my hockey game on the television. So I'd like to start with talking a little bit about Canada, our soy production, and how we are more than waterfalls and hockey, and then maybe a little bit about some of the unique initiatives that we go through. So if you have a big picture of Canada here, and it's a big picture of Canada, the red indicates where we are currently growing soybeans. So it's a very small fraction of the country right now. This comprises our entire growth area, but within the next 5 to 10 years, we're expected to double that area in the west. So up the coast, or up through Manitoba and into Saskatchewan, there in the middle of the country. And this will essentially double the yield that's produced by Canada for soybeans. We are unique in that we have a very selective, a very distinguished segregation system in place for our soybean crops. So we produce GM, non-GM, organic production, as well as entirely identity preserved beans through the line. So we do have quite a selective niche market for food grade beans in Europe as well as in Asia. However, even though we have soybeans in only these little parts of the country, we do see things like this, and one of my colleagues actually lives in Winnipeg here, and you'll notice the temperature there. North Pole minus 19 degrees South centigrade, and Winnipeg minus 29 degrees centigrade. And things like this where, yes, it is colder in Canada than on Mars. We have really cool soybeans. So unlike here, we do grow soybeans for half of the year, because the other half of the year is under about this much snow. In total, these are the different provinces in Canada that grow soybeans, as with their respective seeded acres. So you will notice that we do produce about 5.2 million metric tons of soybeans every year that go to the United States, Europe, and Asia, respectively. And so I represent the Grain Farmers of Ontario, which is the province of Ontario, and those soybeans, which is just over 1 million hectares of seeded soybeans and just over 3 million tons of soy production every year. 20% of that is non-GM production as well, entirely segregated. So we do have that segregation in place, and it's actually a world-renowned system that it's very incredible when I grew up in it and looked at it. So it's very neat. Looking at the future though, we have 5.2 million metric tons here today. By 2020, they're projecting that to be over 12 million metric tons. So right now, as 2013, we were the 4th largest producing country in the world. We'll see what happens by then. Development in crop technologies, changes in our environment will all cause this increase in availability of land for soy. And this won't be as a deterrent to forestry. It won't be because of deforestation. It will be because of existing farmers that are converting their existing rotations to include soybeans in it. So there are most of the western provinces there, that cropland that is grown has a rotation system in place. The increase in yield will come from those rotations, including a soybean crop. We do have a strong reputation in Canada for sustainability, for good, wholesome Canadian product. And one of the things that I would point to is our history here. This only goes back to 1991. These statistics go back much farther. But you'll notice since that time we've had a 16% increase in yields and a 45% decrease in pesticide use. So we have a history of that. Over the last 20 years, our soybean yields have been increasing. Since '91, our yields have increased by 11% in Canada. And this is largely due to genetic improvements in the GMO varieties that we grow. But it also has to do a lot with the Canadian producer learning more about their land, having new technologies available, being able to use technologies that are available. We've heard a lot about South American growers here today, and while our farming is very different than yours in the context of the technologies used and the management that's used, some of the same challenges do occur. And with RTRS, some of those same challenges will come to fruition, just at a different scale and a different cultural paradigm. So while we produce those 5.2 million metric tons, they go to these various outputs. The one list is by volume, so the metric tonnage. The other one is by value in Canadian dollars, which up until about 3 weeks ago was very close to an American dollar, and now it's, let's not talk about that. So most of our soy does go to Netherlands, and then it's distributed throughout Europe from typically Rotterdam. Japan is a big user of Canadian soy for food grade products. The United States for crush products, and China for crush products. Belgium typically takes food grade soy from us. You'll notice that they are ranked 5th in value but don't make up the 5th in volume. So they produce the higher value soybeans, and they are a very, very high market on our list, but we don't ship nearly as many beans as they're worth. So it's a higher value bean, the producer's getting more for those beans, and that soy is actually the crop that will likely go to RTRS standards first, because it is going into that higher value food grade market. A little bit about the Grain Farmers of Ontario. Ontario is the second largest province in Canada. We are comprised of 28,000 corn, wheat, and soybean producers in Ontario. So there were, up until 5 years ago, there were 3 organizations, one for corn, one for soy, and one for wheat. And all producers were part of all 3 because they used all 3 in their rotation. So they said this isn't sustainable. They didn't use those words, but I'm using them now. And they created one organization built off of the efficiencies and produced the Grain Farmers of Ontario. So every year we produce about 5.5 million metric tons of corn, 2.3 million metric tons of soybeans, and just over 1.5 million metric tons of wheat in a year. We have a mission to develop and promote an innovative and successful business environment which will allow our farmer members the opportunity for profitable growth. So the organization is largely driven on economics, like every other business model in the world, but we do take into mind that the land is the farmer's well-being. Similar to some of the farmers in this room will know, if your land isn't sustainable, your business isn't sustainable. And our vision is to drive the Ontario grain industry to become a global leader. And that's why we are here today. That's why we want to be a part of this sustainability movement. We are not being forced into any sort of sustainability initiatives, or our markets aren't even being threatened. But we want to be there proactively engaging with manufacturers, with food processors, and with the retailers where our product's going, to talk about sustainability, to talk about it on farm, to be able to start that discussion and that dialogue, and be open to the fact that we all need to change. This paradigm shift that was mentioned earlier today is happening, and we want to be a part of it. So as the Grain Farmers of Ontario, this is why it's important to us, because we are a significant amount of farmland, 5 million acres. Divide that by 2.5 and you get hectares. We use acres and we use metric tons. I know it's weird, it's because we're close to the States. $2.5 billion in farm gate revenue, which accounts for just over $9 billion in economic output for the province. And in the province, it produces about 40,000 jobs. So why are we looking at sustainability, and why RTRS? Well, currently, I did a bit of market intelligence, and 1.2 million metric tons of our product is going to go into markets where RTRS has been declared as the product of choice by 2016 or 2020. And looking at our export, that's 57% of our value. So looking forward thinking, more than a couple of seasons, we don't want to lose these markets, and we want to retain markets. That's the story I tell the farmer, because that's important to their business and their land. The thing that we usually don't talk about too much is it's not nearly as the changes that are going to be required aren't going to be nearly as costly to their operation in Canada than in some parts of the world, because most of what we're talking about now is communicating our efforts to start with and starting that dialogue and fixing the few things and improving the few things that we have to work on, and then working on the continuous improvement from that point forward. Above that 1.2 million metric tons that are going to be hopefully allotted as RTRS, there are these other European markets that have claimed to be RTRS, want to get RTRS product too, and you've heard two of our end market uses right here from Sweden. As well as the second largest grocery store in Canada, Sobeys. They have an Our Compliments brand which is specific to them and their stores, and they want to be sustainable by 2020, and they were just actually joined RTRS a couple weeks ago, so I see they're making headway there as well. So some of the innovation that we've been working on includes a national interpretation for Canada. And a national interpretation for Canada was essential for our producers, because growing soy in Ontario and Canada is very different than growing soy in Brazil, as far as environmental impacts, as far as social conditions. Thank you. We've had I went through just over, I think it was 227 different regulations and legislative pieces that govern our producers that are producing soy. So we are a very highly regulated system from a pesticide perspective, from a crop handling perspective, from a worker perspective. So it was very easy to get these groups all together in one room. And this is how we started this national interpretation process back in November. The top three organizations, Manitoba Pulse Growers, Pulse Canada, who is here today, the Canadian Seed Trade Association, which deals with our seed exports. Excuse me. CIPRIS, which is our identity preserved system that deals with a lot of the food grade traceability programs. The Canadian Seed Institute, who is here too as well, and they deal with our standards and certification process audits for the existing programs we have going. World Wildlife Fund, Cargill, ADM, Sobeys, we're all at the table as well as Grain Farmers of Ontario. So our first meeting, we went through and we created our national interpretation over the course of a day and a half meeting. The second meeting we had in January, and we reached consensus on a progressive entry model for Canadian producers. So a very quick process. It took 2.5 days total to do this whole process with the technical working group, and it's now been submitted to RTRS. It's been approved by their technical committee, and if you're interested, it's on the RTRS website for public consultation right now. So moving ahead, we are working with 6 farmers in Ontario that have an end market for RTRS beans already in the UK, and they will be working on the field trials this year, and they're hoping to also be certified this year. Part of one of the innovative solutions that we have in Canada that we are working on is a nutrient management program called the 4R Stewardship Program, and this was put forward to us by the Canadian Fertilizer Institute. And they call it the 4R program because it's distributing nutrients on farm in 4 distinct ways, putting the right fertilizer in the right place at the right rate at the right time. And it sounds easy, but it's actually a lot more complicated than just looking up into the sky and saying if it's going to rain or not. And it involves agronomic assessments, it involves getting a crop advisor involved, making sure the producer has a plan for spreading his nutrients, whatever nutrients that is. And the goal is to minimize the impact on the environment, increase the farmer's awareness of what's going on, have him know what he's putting on his field, when to put it on his field, and how he can actually save money and time by not putting on excess material, as well as increasing the sustainability of his purchasing. One of the other projects that we have started in Ontario, it's been going in Western Canada for some time now, but is the Canadian On-Farm Sustainability Calculator. And this is led by Pulse Canada and one of our consultants. And this is looking at the environmental component and impact on a farm by the farmer. So it's a voluntary program where the farmer will input data about his farming practices, about his soil, and it'll look at the climate, and it'll weigh out these 8 different, so far we've done it for 8 crops in Western Canada. We're working into soy, wheat, and corn in Ontario. And it gives you a readout, sort of like the spider graph on the top. I apologize, it's kind of small. But what that chart shows is the blue is where a farmer had his farm year 1, the red's year 2, and the green is year 3. So it illustrates how through various management changes, the farmer can actually illustrate on a piece of paper what his change in environmental impact is. So we're using tools like the nutrient management demonstration as well as this calculator to hopefully aid our farmers as tools to reach things like the RTRS certification. This will make it easier for the farmer to see how continuous improvement works, as well as for the auditor to come on farm. If an auditor comes on farm and this information can be backed up, and the farmer can show a spider graph like you see behind us, it's a very clear indication that continuous improvement is being met on farm environmentally. The last thing that we are working on is the Canadian Roundtable for Sustainable Crops. And we just had an inaugural meeting on March the 11th this year. And the goal is for this roundtable to be a forum for sharing and developing sustainability initiatives in Canada in the grain sector. So it involves organizations from across Canada. You can see the stakeholder list there. It includes many different producer associations from prairie oak growers out west to ourselves in the east, value chain councils, input suppliers, grain handlers, food manufacturers. The idea was to get a multi-stakeholder approach in Canada to look at sustainability, make sure we're not redoubling our efforts on things that are already being done, but also be able to help out. So if GFO is doing a project involving sustainability, and some of the pulse growers in Western Canada are also experiencing the same challenges, then we can pool resources and come to a better conclusion, hopefully faster with our pooled resources. So this is a way to increase the communication, awareness, and transparency with sustainability in Canada. So far we have 3 committees, a steering committee, a technical committee, and a communications, so that we do have the ability to spread that sustainability awareness amongst our members, but as well as the public. Because unless the public knows what you're doing, it makes very little relevance. And the comment was made here earlier about the consumer knowing the brand and understanding the brand and what it means. And that's essential for sharing sustainability. They need to know what they're buying is sustainable. And RTRS is one way that we're showing that with soybeans right now globally. And we feel like this is one of the venues that we can share those ideas and be able to move forward in Canada from a sustainable perspective. And with that, I'll close my presentation. My contact information is there, and thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.